Welcome to part one of your 7-part series on becoming superhuman. My name is Ben Greenfield, and I am the head coach at Superhuman.com. My job is to train our global network of coaches to help you to achieve your goals, and also to help teach you via our website at Superhumancoach.com how to get a better body and maximize your performance in the safest, quickest, and most effective way possible. At superhumancoach.com, one of the primary components of performance that we teach to all our coaches is that performance is not simply one variable, but we combine several different variables when we consider what superhuman performance actually is. And that includes not only what we're covering today, endurance, but also power, strength, speed, balance, and range of motion. All of these are crucial to attaining your goals as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. But today, what I want to do is teach you a little bit about endurance and how you can set up a system to build your endurance as fast as possible. So I define endurance as the ability of the heart, the lungs, and the vascular system to deliver oxygen and nutrient-rich blood to working muscles during sustained physical activity, and the ability of those muscles to repeat a movement many times or to hold a particular position for an extended period of time. And of course, while we would all consider something like a marathon or a 5K or a triathlon the ability of muscles to repeat a movement many times, some of us forget about that second component, the ability to hold a particular position for an extended period of time. So water skiing is endurance, jiu-jitsu is endurance, sitting in your chair all day at work is even endurance, and you need to train your muscles and include a component in your workouts that actually targets this specific goal of endurance. Now, when training for endurance, there are many different zones that you may find. If you go out and you buy a heart rate monitor, or you, for example, just Google the word heart rate training zones, you'll find several different zone training methods, some of 3 zones, some of 5, some of 7. At the Superhuman Network, we split things into 5 different zones. And the zones for endurance are Zone 1, which is recovery, Zone 2, which is an easy conversational pace, and this would be considered aerobic. Zone 3 is your maximum fat-burning pace, and we do focus on teaching you, and your coach actually would work with you if you were working with a coach within the Superhuman Coach Network on how to find out your maximum fat-burning heart rate. But that would be Zone 3. That'd be the heart rate that you would use during, say, a morning fasted fat-burning workout, or during the entire bike leg of something like an Ironman triathlon. Zone 4 is your lactic acid threshold, where your body starts to burn high amounts of carbohydrate and produce lactic acid more quickly than it can actually be removed. And then Zone 5 is what we would consider to be sustained speed. Now, one of the more popular methods of zone training is going to typically add at least a Zone 6, which is many times referred to as power or explosive speed, but we actually consider that not to be a particular component of endurance. And in most cases, endurance is going to consist of activities that you're performing for at least about 2 minutes or longer. And so that's why these 5 zones are the zones that we choose for endurance. And then power is something that you actually train separately. Now, I know that all of these different zones can be confusing, but here's a chart that nicely lays things out for you. And this chart is based off of research done on the training protocols of some of the best endurance athletes in the world. And you can see there on the far left side of this chart that there's 5 zones. And each of those zones corresponds to a specific intensity that's set up in that second column. Now, the intensity that you'll see here is expressed as a percentage of your maximum heart rate. For example, if you were to get onto a treadmill and run as hard as you could for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then stop and take your heart rate just as you were about to fall off the back of the treadmill, that would be your maximum heart rate. Well, for example, Zone 1 would be 45 to 65% of your maximum heart rate, whereas a Zone 4, for example, that lactate threshold we talked about, is 88 to 93%. Zone 3, that maximum fat-burning heart rate, is 81 to 87%. And you can see that in that very middle column, there are sample intensity bouts that are examples of some of the training sessions that you would actually engage in if you wanted to train these zones as effectively as possible. So, for example, if you simply wanted to go out and train yourself to very, very efficiently burn fat as a fuel, One workout that you may do, and again, this all depends on your goals. This, for example, the example I'm about to give would be something that, a more advanced triathlete might do on a bicycle, 6 by 15 minutes with 2-minute recoveries between each session, and that's a 50 to 90-minute exercise session. But that would be an example of endurance training in zone 3. You jump down to zone 5, an example of a zone 5 workout might be 8 by 3 minutes with 2 minutes of recovery. So as you can see, this chart can be used to literally put together an entire year of endurance training in each different zone if you were so inclined. And actually, one of the things that we provide all of our coaches with are dozens and dozens of workouts designed to effectively reach into each zone. We use an online training software called Training Peaks over at trainingpeaks.com. And what that allows coaches to do is take the workouts that we've created within the Superhuman Network and actually use them in your program. But we've used many of the type of concepts you'll see in a chart like this to make sure that the workouts that we've designed are completely bulletproof in their ability to be able to train the exact energy system that we're going after, whether it be zone 1 up through zone 5. And that's something that's very important, is that our coaches actually have the ability to prescribe workouts with laser accuracy based off of targeting each of these different zones. And one of the things that happens when you work with a coach is you complete a questionnaire that actually allows us to identify what you may be deficient in, what you need work in, zone 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. There are several different ways that you could find your personal zones. One would be to go to a university or a sports medicine or a sports science or a sports performance laboratory and do what's called an indirect calorimetry test. This is also called an exercise physiology test or a VO2 max test. And what you do is you literally have a mask on your face and it measures the oxygen you consume, the carbon dioxide that you produce, and then basically gives you exact zones for each different heart rate or each different power or each different speed that you're at. And you could do this test on a treadmill or on a bicycle, incidentally, and it will tell you each of these personal zones. Another way that you could do this is via a self-test, and one of the things that each of our coaches learns is a 20 to 30-minute protocol that you can do on a bicycle or on a treadmill that allows you to easily determine your heart rate zones based off of what's called your lactate threshold. So this is not a test where you go as hard as possible. Instead, you're just going until your legs are burning and you're at a maximum sustainable pace, and you simply sustain that pace for anywhere from 3 up to 20 minutes and take your average heart rate during that session, and that gives us your threshold heart rate. Based off of that heart rate, you can then determine zones 1 up through zone 5. And that heart rate's going to change. It's going to change throughout the training year, depending on the type of training that you're doing, whether you're training to lose fat or to do a triathlon or a marathon, and you're going to retest every 8 to 12 weeks to make sure that those numbers aren't getting much different. Because if your training zones and all of your workouts are based off of, you knowing what heart rate you're at, if that heart rate changes, it's important to actually know that. So, there are certain limitations that can be trained based off of these zones. For example, if you can go for a long period of time, but you get tired as soon as you start producing lactic acid, you'd want to use more of the zone 4 intervals. If you can do interval workouts or intense workouts pretty well, but you just get tired after you've been plodding along for a long period of time, like say during a 1-hour run, you'd do more zone 2 efforts and longer zone 3 intervals. If you lacked the ability for the final kick to go hard in a 5K or the end of a marathon or the end of a triathlon, we'd want to include more zone 5 intervals in your program. And if you just need a recovery day, you would do, for example, a zone 1 workout where you aren't exceeding the heart rate that's at the top of zone 1 to give you better blood flow and faster recovery. Because one of the ways that you recover more quickly is not by sitting on the couch all day, believe it or not, but by engaging in some type of targeted zone 1 activity. And so that helps out quite a bit too. So those are some examples of how you can identify limitations or needs and then program using your zones accordingly. Now, the last thing that I want to leave you with in this presentation here, which is part of our 7-part series in which I'm going to be teaching you a lot of different concepts, but I want to tell you a little bit about eating to improve endurance, because When you look at endurance and muscles producing forces for extended periods of time, you're looking at primarily a use of slow twitch muscle. And these are the type of muscle fibers in your body that utilize fat very well via a process that's called beta oxidation. It gets a little bit complicated, and I don't need to get into it in this presentation, but it's basically the primary energy system used to produce ATP or to produce energy is fat via slow twitch muscle. And because your body's carbohydrate stores are limited, the average person has about 2,000 calories or so to burn. In order to become as good as possible at endurance, and in order to have what we would define as superhuman endurance, you need to turn yourself into a carbohydrate sparing, fat burning machine. It means that you can go for a longer period of time without bonking, and your body uses fatty acids very, very efficiently as a fuel. Now, there are some excellent resources out there to read about how to turn yourself into a fat-burning machine. We certify all our coaches to make sure that they know everything they need to know about turning you into a fat-burning machine. But one of the ways that you do this right off the bat is you begin to adopt what's called a ketogenic diet. This diet takes about 10 to 14 days to get used to. It's a little bit tough as you first start off, just because if you're very, very used to burning carbs as a fuel and then you force your body to start burning fats as a fuel, it does have to go through an adaptive phase because your brain can actually burn ketones or fatty acids as a fuel quite efficiently. But if it's used to just burning glucose, it's going to take a little bit of time. And we do teach some supplements and techniques to help get you through that period of time a little bit more easily. But this is a sample ketogenic diet. For breakfast, you might have some coconut oil or what's called medium chain triglyceride or MCT oil. You might have about 3 eggs with spinach or kale, vegetables or broccoli, and you can just scramble that all together in a pan. And you would cook your eggs in the coconut or the MCT oil. For lunch, you might have a full-fat coconut milk smoothie with half a scoop of protein powder, some almonds, and some blueberries. As you may have noticed, this is not a high-protein diet because proteins can actually get turned into sugars pretty easily. It's a high-fat diet. For a snack in the afternoon, you might have a handful or two of raw almonds. And for dinner, you could have some ground beef, and you would want to get the higher fat content ground beef. You don't want to fry that in butter. Have some vegetables on the side, and you choose some really dark mitochondria-rich greens or iron-rich greens. Those are things like spinach and kale and bok choy, broccoli, things of that nature, and that's really good for endurance as well. Obviously, this diet is not very high in the type of things that you tend to see endurance folks eating, like carbohydrates and scones, biscotti, cookies, candy, stuff like that, sports drinks, gels. But this helps to turn you into a fat-burning machine. And whether your goal is to simply lose a few pounds or to do a marathon or to do a triathlon, this diet works really, really well. And then as your body becomes fat adapted, you can start on specific days to add in carbohydrates. But that's basically what it looks like. Now, some of the ways that you would approach an endurance workout would be, for example, if you are going to work out in zone 1 or zone 2. You just don't need food. If you've gotten yourself to that fat adapted state, just yesterday, and I'm actually recording this particular presentation in the summer. Yesterday, I went out for a 3-hour bike ride. I took no fuel with me. My body was burning ketones as a fuel the whole time, and I felt great. But your body does take a little while to get used to that phase. However, once it does, you can do zone 1 and zone 2 workouts completely unfueled. If you're going into zone 3 or higher, usually about 2 to 3 hours prior, you want to take on about 400 to 600 calories of carbohydrate. And this would be assuming that you've gotten yourself into a fat-adapted state, which usually comes before you start eating this amount of carbohydrate prior to a zone 3 plus workout. The nice thing is that once you have become fat-adapted and turn yourself into a fat-burning machine, the whole concept of carbohydrate loading or eating lots and lots of carbohydrate leading up to the week of an event becomes less and less necessary. Your body is simply able to, within 1 to 2 days of adopting a higher carbohydrate diet or a higher carbohydrate intake, able to take those carbs and store them away very, very quickly and efficiently as a fuel. And so you don't have to go through a whole week, for example, of carbohydrate loading. Now, in terms of baseline calorie intake for something like an endurance event, You start at about 250 calories per hour, and you work your way up from there. So if you're going to go do an Ironman triathlon or a marathon or something of that nature, about 250 calories per hour is about your baseline in terms of what you would eat for something like that. You can drink to thirst. You don't need to drink a set amount of water. You simply drink when you're thirsty. You don't need to take salt pills or electrolytes. And we teach all of our coaches here at the Superhuman Coach Network exactly why. But to get a pretty good primer on this, go over to another website that I run, my personal blog over at bengreenfieldfitness.com, and do a search over there for Tim Noakes, Noakes, Tim Noakes. I've interviewed him about both this concept of drinking to thirst as well as electrolytes. Now, if you don't do well with eating gels, typical gels, while you're out there exercising, usually what you want to do is look for a gel that has sucrose or glucose in it. These are simpler sugars that most people's guts who aren't able to handle typical sports drinks and typical sports gels without getting gastrointestinal distress, they're able to handle these pretty well. And if you are able to handle typical sports drinks or gels or sports blends while you're out there exercising, one of the things that I like to recommend is a super starch, which is a very, very high molecular weight, long chain starch that your body can burn pretty efficiently at only as few as 80 to 100 calories per hour, or else a blend of fructose and maltodextrin, which is a simple sugar combined with a long chain sugar, and that allows you to absorb a lot of fuel while you're out there. And of course, one of the things that happens is when it gets hot, everything changes. So you need to realize that you got to experiment with whatever fuel that you plan on using during something like an endurance event in hot conditions, because your gut is unique. No matter what somebody like me tells you, you still got to go out and try it. So those are just some of the little recommendations in terms of foods when it comes to something like endurance exercise and longer term endurance exercise. Don't get the impression that everyone that we work with here at the Superhuman Network is some kind of an Ironman triathlete or a professional marathoner or something of that nature. But one of the things that we train our coaches is how to do endurance events very, very well and train the body how to last for long periods of time, burning as high as possible an amount of fat as the body can. So in terms of a few other concepts here, one of the things that you'll want to do once you've gotten into this idea of a lower carbohydrate, higher fat intake is you can actually take 1 to 2 days of the week, usually your higher calorie intake days of the week, and or your higher energy expenditure days of the week, and you can take in higher calorie intake on these 2 days or 1 to 2 days. So for example, Monday through Friday, you may have higher fat, lower carbohydrate, lower overall calorie intake, which works really well for weight loss and also for turning your body into that fat burning machine. But then on these extra 1 to 2 days of the week, you might have higher calorie intake, higher carbohydrate intake. Now, in terms of what you'd be going for a goal, usually for someone who's training for endurance, we like to see about 100 grams or so of carbs on a regular day, which is just enough to keep your liver's carbohydrate stores topped off. It's about 400 calories of carbs. There's 4 calories in a gram. And when you're on your higher carb, higher calorie days, a day where you might have a really long bike ride or long run or a big swim or a lot of activity, you might go 2 to 3 times that. So it really depends. We've got some folks that we work with who aren't doing longer workouts on the weekends, and for those folks, they can literally stay in this higher fat, lower carb intake, typically throughout the entire week and for several weeks running before we do like a refeed week or a couple of refeed days. And of course, as I mentioned before, protein can get turned into sugar. We do not condone a high protein diet or something like an Atkins diet just because of the concept of gluconeogenesis, which means that proteins can get converted into sugars, and that's not going to allow you to fat adapt. So as I mentioned, typically 10 to 14 days or about a 2-week adaptation period to get used to a lower carb, higher fat diet. Medium chain triglycerides work really well. That's a MCT oil or coconut oil because that will give your body energy without making you feel like you're going to bonk during the day or without getting these huge appetite cravings during the day. Like if you're having trouble sleeping at night, you can even do a couple tablespoons of this before you go to bed. Blood glucose monitor is nice. One of these cheap $15, $20 blood glucose monitors that you can pick up at your local pharmacy, and you can pay attention to what type of foods actually spike your blood sugar. And that's really, really useful because you can simply eliminate those type of foods from your diet, and that helps to turn you into a fat-burning machine even more quickly. And we do have an entire 3-hour module that we take all of our coaches through, and you're gonna be able to see some of the tips from that module in a future release as part of this 7-part email series that you're getting, but we have a fat loss module. We go over some supplements in there that really help with carbohydrate cravings and appetite cravings, and that's another thing that you're definitely going to want to do is pull out supplements if you need to. One of the more common ones is cinnamon. Believe it or not, just doing a few teaspoons of cinnamon a day can really help with carbohydrate cravings because it can stabilize your blood sugar levels and your insulin levels. Now, a few resources for you if you want to go finger surfing and type in a few more URLs on your keyboard. As I mentioned, I have that Tim Noakes interview about water and electrolytes over at bengreenfieldfitness.com. There's also a good interview with Peter Adia on there. We talk about a ketogenic diet and endurance performance. There's a good interview with Stacy Sims where we really just geek out on how to eat during endurance events, and she comes up with some really good information. And then also do a search over at bengreenfieldfitness.com for the Superhuman Food Pyramid, or you can download that for free over at superhumancoach.com, and all of those would be further resources for you in terms of endurance and food. Now, what we just went over literally only scratched the surface of what we go through with all the coaches who are part of the Superhuman Coach Network, and these are the folks that I put my stamp of approval on in terms of the people that you can work with and feel comfortable that they're going to be able to get you the results that you want as safely, quickly, and effectively as possible. So if you do want to work with a coach who's a part of the Superhuman Coach Network and who is certified to put together programs that incorporate some of the concepts that you just learned as part of this presentation, just go over to superhumancoach.com and look for the button that looks just like that to click here to request a coach. And we'll hook you up with someone either in your area or, if you would prefer, online, who can meet your needs, who we endorse, who has been through all of our modules, who has passed all of our exams on this information, and who's going to be able to help you out and give you a really good program and a solid plan. So check that out at superhumancoach.com. Stay tuned for the next presentation in the free autoresponder series that you've signed up for. And this is Ben Greenfield signing out from superhumancoach.com. Have a great day.